I got to do some research on data from the Kepler Space Telescope. I worked on NASA grants. It was really cool stuff. And it was huge for my IT career too, because that's where I learned Linux.
Like teaching folks how to work in a professional world. So what are the kinds of skills you're teaching people so that they can navigate that?
So we focus a lot in my class on soft skills, is just effectively.
Older folks are currently having this conversation about whether entry-level jobs will exist or not. And the reason they're having it is because they look at the entry-level job they had.
About technical folks not being the most social, I don't force anybody. I don't make anybody do anything outside of their comfort zone, except be somewhere that may not be exactly that comfortable.
I mean, pivoting into this thing, one of the things I'm super interested in is just how do people get where they are, right? I think when you're starting out in a career, and I remember this when I was like, knee high to a grasshopper, when I was looking at people who had these like amazing careers that they were doing stuff, I was like, I don't know what the road between here and there looks like, not understanding that it's windy for most people. So I'm super curious. Tell me a little bit about like, how did you get into IT? How did you get bitten by the bug? And then like, how did you end up getting into the position you're in now?
Absolutely. So, it's funny. I was definitely, I was big into Atari and, those kind of things, growing up. But when I was 12, my dad got a computer for his business, and it was delivered and installed and set up while he was at work. And so of course I started tinkering with it. And I promptly broke it.
Nice. Okay. I figured the story was going to go there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I chowdered the auto exec bat, lost the mouse drivers, and I had to figure out how to get it fixed before my dad got home. So I managed to figure out how to manually load the mouse drivers, and problem solved. And then I just added in the menu system and item to load the mouse drivers manually. And, it was fine after that. Nobody was any wiser, but
But your dad got home and like, why are you so sweaty? Why do you see
yes, exactly. So that really got me into computers because I had to figure it out. I mean, I was literally editing config files and after having never touched a computer before. So, it was just, I mean, I was not intimidated by it at all.
Very cool. Very cool. And so like now you do a combination of, work in IT, but you also teach. Right. So tell me a little bit about how did you get interested in teaching? Was it always something you wanted to do? How did you end up getting into the role?
Yeah. So it's actually kind of roundabout because back in I was living here in Tuolumne County and then ended up moving to San Diego in 2002. And at that time I was like, well, I'm not doing anything. And a wise man said to me, hey, the time's going to pass anyway. So I was like, well, I'm going to get my degree. I don't have a bachelor's, and so I'm just going to do that. So I started taking night classes at the junior colleges, and took me 5 years to get through that. And then I ended up transferring to San Diego State and getting into the astronomy program there. And so my bachelor's is in astronomy. It was amazing because I got to do some research on data from the Kepler Space Telescope. I worked on NASA grants. It was really cool stuff. And it was huge for my IT career too, because that's where I learned Linux, which has been so incredibly useful for me. But at any rate, I figured, when I started school, I was going to do something I wouldn't have a chance to do otherwise. So I'm like, great, science, I love it. I've never had a chance to do it. I'm going to try this. This is my opportunity. And then I was like, well, I really want to teach. I really enjoy, helping people and stuff like that. And so why not? It was a good idea. But by the time I got my bachelor's and finished out the astronomy bit, and I'll tell you, it was definitely one of the biggest struggles I've been through in my life getting that degree. But I at that point, I was like, well, there's 200 professors per job out there. So I was likely going to be living like a grad student the rest of my life. And I just couldn't handle that. So I went back to IT for a career and just started working again. And it wasn't until 2019 when I started at the county and started up an internship program with our local community college here that I met the dean of career technical education. And he goes, hey, have you ever thought of teaching?
Oh, awesome. Okay. Yeah.
And so it took about a year or so to get spun up on that. But they brought me in to teach the IT Pre-Apprenticeship program, which is sponsored by Google, by a grant from Google. So I actually got to build out my lab effectively with a blank check.
Okay, so awesome,
Yes.
super nice. Two directions I want to go with that. So the first one is when you're an IT pre-apprenticeship program, so you're running and teaching that. What kind of folks are you? These are folks who are doing a career switch, or they're just getting into the notion of where they're going with their career? Like
It
who are all the folks in this program?
it literally runs the gamut. Um, I have students who are fresh out of high school. I have students who are concurrently enrolled in high school even. And, and I guess, you know, young, fresh out of high school, starting in college, all the way up to, folks that are older than me. And, they're looking at either a career change or just trying to pick up a new skill or whatnot.
Mhm.
Um, but I really try to run my program so that I'm teaching them. I mean, this is career technical education. This is not academic. I'm
Sure.
not putting them through academic rigor.
Mhm.
I'm teaching them something they can use in the real world.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when I run the class, I really focus on, I mean, the technology is a stage for what we're doing. And that what we're doing is learning how to be professional, learning how to operate in a professional environment, and doing so in such a way that is most applicable to the person doing the learning. So I try to have a broad range of approaches
Mm.
so that one of them will resonate with the student.
So I'm super interested in this. So one of the things I have a bit of a framework for thinking about sort of like progression in a career, right? And so like when we interview people, for instance, we think about three buckets of things, right? We have this notion of like experience, which is what you've done before, right? So if you show up and you're like, I've used Linux for 25 years, you're going to be proficient with your Linux day one, right? Then there's skills, like things that you've been taught to do, like, I can debug or I can program or I can speak Spanish, something like this. And you can teach a skill. And then there's traits, which are just sort of the inbuilt things like I am a curious person. I am, that sort of stuff, right?
Right.
So I'm super curious when you're thinking about this sort of pre-apprenticeship program, it sounds like you're working on building some skills, right, for folks, right?
Mhm.
Building up potentially a little bit of experience. But you mentioned sort of like teaching folks how to work in a professional world. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking now of like somebody who's just coming out of high school. They've never had a job in a professional environment. What are the kinds of skills you're teaching people so that they can navigate that?
Oh, so we focus a lot in my class on soft skills. Is just effectively, I mean, with my forays into leadership and a lot of those theories I've looked into and learned about and stuff. I try to share a lot of that information, the
Mhm.
the the tips and tricks that I've learned. Like for example, have you ever heard of the SCARF method?
Mm.
Okay, so it's a way of looking at uh, triggering social responses in people. So, for example, if a saber-toothed tiger pops out and goes to eat you, you have fight or flight and you run.
Okay.
Well,
Sure.
the same thing is absolutely true. The exact same physiological systems get triggered when you encounter a social threat as well.
Okay.
And so with this SCARF method, you can actually tailor your approach to somebody when you have to go to somebody and get buy-in in such a way that doesn't trigger their fight or flight response, that keeps them at the table, that keeps them able to collaborate. And so I teach this,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
just little tricks that I've learned along the way,
Okay.
that are kind of like Jedi mind tricks, sort of, but
Okay.
if you really understand it, it really does make a difference.
Fair enough.
So there's things like that. And customer service. I do a lot of customer service exercises, a lot of role playing, a lot of what ifs. So,
Very cool, very cool. So like, and pivoting into that, one of the things that like, and I have kids who are in the like entering the working world sort of ages now, and so I'm painfully aware of sort of transitions now. And there's a narrative that basically says AI is going to eat all the entry level jobs, and at the end of it, we're just going to have like 5 or 6 very senior engineers. They probably all work at Google, and like nobody else has a job, kind of thing. It's just like that. You can read sort of the death of capitalism in one way through AI via that.
yes.
I'm kind of curious, one, like, what's your perspective on that, and how are you thinking about preparing these folks? Is AI this transitional force? Is it featuring into kind of how you're prepping folks for the working world? How does that work?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I am very cognizant of its existence right now, and frankly, its infancy.
Mhm.
I mean, people talk so much about it. The question was something along the lines of, is it a profound change or
Mhm.
whatnot? Profound, no.
Okay.
Give me a holodeck. That's profound.
You
You know,
okay, that's fascinating. So I wanna pull on that first, and then I wanna
you got it.
so
Yeah.
because I'll make an argument for profundity, and then I'd love to hear, like, your the
Yes.
counter there. So on the profundity side, the thing that I wrestle with sometimes is
Yeah.
it these technologies are actually asking us to ask some things about the value of human effort in places that's never really been challenged before, right? And so that's and in that case, sort of this sort of, the more traditionally white collar jobs, they're sort of these office jobs. There's sort of like a lot of thinking that goes into this sort of thing, and these new technologies are actually obviating the need for a lot of that sort of stuff. So a lot of people are sitting down asking like, wither my existence in corporate America, kind of a thing. So you're saying not profound, like, and why is that? Like, what's at the root of, like, I don't buy it?
Well, listen, it is, I mean, it is profound in that it is kind of a new thing, and it's
Okay.
it's a new paradigm and everything.
Mhm.
But at this point, it
Mhm.
is not such a big leap that it isn't still just another tool. And granted, listen, tools change our landscape irrevocably. They do. And history has shown us that.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that there won't be any change, and I'm not saying that it isn't going to rewrite things.
Mhm.
It's just, to me, when you use the word profound, this is a big step, but it's
Mhm.
still just a regular step.
Okay, so
Profound means
a
something more
difference
than that.
potentially in degree, but not a difference in kind,
Yeah,
is sort of where you're going with this thing. Okay, fair enough. Because,
exactly.
like, I've talked a lot. Actually, ended up asking this question of a number of people. It's
Yeah.
one of the questions I tried to sort of seek out answers to. And somebody a couple days ago was saying, and I appreciated this answer. They basically like, look, like, older folks are currently having this conversation about whether entry level jobs will exist or not, and the reason they're having it is because they look at the entry level job they had, and like, that job's going away. And it's like, yeah, but nobody wants that entry level job anymore, right? Like the entry level jobs of 30 years ago are not, and like 30 years before that, the entry level jobs from then were gone. So like, this is sort of the evolution of that. So I'll kind of buy that as a statement.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's interesting is, though, it's asking a question also about, like, the value of art and the
Mhm.
value of, like, the written word and the value of some very, very human-centered things and human-centered artifacts in a way that I think is potentially challenging. You know what I mean?
Oh, and I absolutely agree. And I can I have a personal stake in that because I'm a science fiction author as well.
Okay, yeah.
Um, and so the idea of, I mean, because I started in the Amazon self-publishing space in 2019.
Mhm,
And I have a trilogy out, and uh, at that time it was difficult. The
mhm.
the the arena was crowded. There was a lot of noise, and it was very hard to get your signal through. Um, it's totally impossible today with the amount of AI generated material that's out there. It has
Like,
basically polluted the environment terminally, in
mm,
my opinion.
okay.
And so, your mention about art and stuff like that is so relevant to the conversation. And I mean, honestly, taking it from the perspective of technology and IT and such, you don't really think about that. But, being a creative as well, it it really does make a big difference.
Fair enough. No, I'll buy that. It's challenging as well. My wife is a writer, and like, she looks at sort of the I mean, and there's an interesting, just as a side note, there's this book. It's called Literary Theory for Robots. If you haven't ever read it, it's kind of fascinating one. It's about sort of assistive technologies in writing, and he does a good job, I think, of, again, difference of degree, not difference in kind, of the AI thing. But I do think the acceleration there is really giving a lot of people pause. So that totally makes sense. Okay, I want to flip back to the question. We were talking about
Yeah.
students, and we're talking
Yes.
about this notion of, like, hey, we're preparing them for the working world, and we're thinking about, like, how do you end up, like, if you're coaching a student now on, like, hey, I'm prepping you for a sort of a career in IT, or at the very least a springboard of IT into your career. Like, what kinds of skills, what kind of technologies, what kinds of things are you telling them? Hey, these are things that are important to learn now, so that you can have an easier time sort of climbing up that ladder.
Well, obviously, in class, we focus on all the basics. We focus on operating systems. We focus on hardware. We focus on networking. So I mean, those are all the kind of things that we delve into.
Mhm.
But I honestly, um, I have students of such varying skill levels,
Mhm.
that it is a really big challenge making sure everybody is engaged and learning,
Oh, it's
because
right.
I have to dial it back when I'm dealing with some of the folks with less experience,
Sure.
and then I have to really accelerate things when I'm dealing with some of these other guys who are just, I mean, astoundingly competent at
Mhm.
the at and they're just, I mean, they're starting out, and
Yeah.
they've been tinkering on their own for long enough. They've gained just a level of mastery that is well beyond what my classes are really geared towards, honestly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Are you and do you think that when you're thinking about IT as the arena, is the focus more on sort of general problem solving or problem solving within the specific arena of IT? I'm curious about that.
So it's all about problem solving.
Mm.
That it doesn't matter the arena. The ability to problem solve is ubiquitous. And I try to present my students with opportunities to solve problems. I don't give them assignments. I don't spoon feed them knowledge to regurgitate to me later on. No, I give them a problem and I hope they have a problem. I hope it fails on them. I hope it doesn't work and they have to figure it out, because that's where the best learning occurs.
Interesting. Because I mean, so in that case, like when you challenge yourself, then you have to figure out like the interesting way out and stuff like this. I want to relate that back to something that you said sort of at the top, which you mentioned, as you were working. And I gotta be honest, like,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of an astronomy side nerd myself, and so when I learned that you had done the stuff with telescopes, is always just like, oh, that would be amazing, right?
Yes.
But you said that it was a time of great struggle for you. Like, was that sort of like learning a lot of complicated material? Was it struggle on like that? Like what was the
Oh,
struggle and how did you summit it? What did it
oh my,
teach?
oh my goodness, man. So there's, so I will step into one of my techniques for interrelations, and I'm going to be vulnerable here. And I'm going to tell you, I suffer from mental illness.
Mm,
I've been bipolar all my life,
mm,
and throughout the stretch that I was in school was one of the hardest times of my life in that regard.
mm,
And so the fact that I made it through despite the challenges I was facing
mm,
was a phenomenal victory. And between that and finding some medical help that really changed my life,
mhm.
um, between those two things, it really accelerated me. And today I'm a person who's addicted to accomplishment.
Nice. Okay.
And I kind of learned that from surviving all of that, honestly.
I find that like so just I'll really similarly I've gone when I go back in my career, when I go back in my life, and I find those moments where it's like literally like I cannot see the road through. Like, you have those moments where you're just like this is a brick wall. It goes as high up as I can and as far as I can see in both directions, and then you figure out a way to dig under it or whatever.
Yes.
You come out on the other side, and like what's so interesting to me. So I coach competitive girls softball,
Okay.
and there are times with the kids where you watch them struggle with something, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
I get to see this over and over again, and particularly when they were younger, and they just be like, I can't do X or whatever, this kind of same thing with my kids. And it's the problem seems bigger than them. And then when they summit it, right, and on the other side of that, they're like, okay, no, it's tracked, and that builds like I don't know if it's a muscle, I don't know exactly what it is that it is. It is absolutely like this, like
Yes.
I'm firmer of foot
Yes.
on the other side of that thing, which is so interesting. I will also say, I mean,
Yeah.
as a man like in my 50s,
Yeah.
one of the things I've experienced is like as you experience tragedies in your life, as you experience like hard times, it builds up an ability to relate to other people who have had those in a way that I think is fascinating. It's sort of like I remember when I was a teenager and like my life experience like was super, super small at that point, and you'd meet people who are having struggles in their life and you just be like, oh my God. And you kind of run away from that because you just couldn't relate. And like now it's like, no, like I can sit with people and be like, oh yeah, no, this is kind of a thing. So, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And again, I'm just going to go back and fanboy on the idea that you've done astronomy with computers. That's pretty cool. Let's be real with ourselves on that one. Right? That is pretty awesome. So yeah. So, okay, so that's kind of cool. Now, one of the other things that you and I have talked about before is this difference between sort of doing technology, right, and actually being a technician and sort of the human component to it. And so I'm super curious, like, what does that mean to you? How do you think about that? And then how do you teach that to your students? Like, how do you impart the humanity into this thing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, really, at the end of the day, as you said, it's humanity. We're all human, and um, it's it's got to be a holistic approach. You have to take into account everybody's humanity,
Mm,
and it's like so I had a situation where somebody said, okay, we've got a morale problem, and
mm,
all right, what do we do? Okay, well, the boss stands up and says, morale, we don't need it. Just do your job. Just focus on the core attributes, and that's all we need.
put the
And-
work in.
exactly. And so I'm like, no, 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 no. Hold on. Let me go get one of our board of supervisors to actually come visit our department and talk to us and listen to us. And then we felt heard, we felt recognized, and I mean, it's a holistic approach. Everybody's human.
Mm,
And, so you got to focus on all of those. You have to accept all of those things.
mm,
You can't get around it. There's no way past it. It is.
mm.
And so that's why I teach the soft skills. That's why I focus on, the customer service things and the interpersonal relations and stuff like that. It, I mean, it's just who we are.
And so I'm curious, like pulling on that for a second, because one of the challenges I think sometimes happens if you have people who sort of natively grok that, if they're sort of like native, like they're people or whatever, that kind of thing, I think you can summit that or bridge that gap relatively straightforwardly. But I find I run into technologists in particular who view anything sort of like with a human shape that isn't theirs as largely gross. And they're just like, hey, I'm going to, hang out and do this thing and just, like do my technical stuff. And like all of you weird, squishy people just get the hell out of my way.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like in your teaching in particular,
Yeah.
have you run into a particular instance? Like what's the coaching method, or like, how do you end up kind of piercing that a little bit to sort of see if you can get somebody to see the other side of that?
It's all about teamwork, collaboration. I force that. I make that a requirement because, like, for example, we're working on our lab in my class, and when we started the class, we had raw cable hanging off the wall. Nothing was punched down. We had a stack of old computers in the corner. Nothing was built. And they've built it. They punched it down. They installed the switch and the firewall and everything. They loaded OSs on their computers. They've essentially done it all end to end.
Mhm.
And they've had to do it working together because one team's working on this, but you got to get the DHCP server up before you can worry about getting a computer online. And so the folks who had the need to get something online for their project had to help the DHCP guys to get that up and running. So I just make it an environment where they have to work together. And you know, that is the base level. That is it. I just give them the opportunity. It's up to them what they do with it. And
Yes.
honestly, like you said about technical folks not being the most social, I don't force anybody. I don't make anybody do anything outside of their comfort zone, except be somewhere that may not be exactly that comfortable.
It is an interesting dynamic as well. One of the things, and I'll tell you, like when I'm talking to younger and career folk, and like I go back to the university I graduated from periodically and talk to students there. I always end up sort of telling them, look, like the technical portions of the thing are skills. That's all they are. And skills can be taught, and you can eventually teach them to a robot. So like if that's the differentiator, you've got a problem. You very much need to focus on the traits and the human part of this activity, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that helped me out early days as well, like, leading a team, and I had a number of technologists and they just really like wet cats in a bag, was to sit down with one of them in particular and say like, hey, so we don't hire dumb people here, right?
Yeah.
So let's just start with that as an assumption.
Yeah.
So what is it that this person that you can't interact with, what are they good at? I'm not interested in what they're bad at. I'm interested in what they're good at. Go figure that out, right? Spend some time to actually figure that out and then come on back. And like forcing that conversation to sort of do a little bit of a reset on that
Yeah.
general thing. So, okay, fair enough. So I am curious, you've done in your career. You've gone from like, hey, I'm working in a telescope, kind of thing,
Yeah.
to being a supervisor, running teams, that sort of stuff.
Yes.
When you made the leap from I'm an individual contributor to I'm actually leading a team now,
Yeah.
what was surprising to you? Like, what was it? Was there anything that you were like, whoa, I did not expect that was going to be true?
Oh my goodness, man. Okay. So I'll start at my first senior level experience.
Mm.
Before I was actually fully in management, just being as effectively a team lead. And it was shortly after graduating, getting my degree and everything. I hopped around, did a couple of random things here and there for a bit, and then wound up at an MSP in San Diego. Um, and I mean, they were small size. There was 10, 15 other guys, in the company. It was pretty small, but I walked in and was immediately given this position of deference. And it was really, well, it contributed to a lot of imposter syndrome feelings, first of all, and a lot of nervous sweating. I'll admit that. But it was really quite astonishing to see these guys deferring to me, being like, "Oh, you're the Linux expert." And then, they were like following my lead on everything. And then, oh, you're the expert with customers. You've done this a long time. So, we're going to follow your lead. And just this constant, we're going to follow your lead. It just didn't, I mean, it wasn't wrong because did know what I was doing, but it just felt so new and so unusual. Um, but that's really when I got into it. And honestly, it really fit me like a glove. And not, it's funny, you might say, well, where did you learn leadership? Well, I had some really inherent good habits,
Mm.
and I learned them from my mom. Funny enough.
Example, like what, like from a leadership perspective,
Yeah.
what's one of those habits, or what are a couple of those habits that have really served you well in that context?
Well, first of all, it's the commitment and service to your people.
Okay.
So like, listen, growing up, my folks had a take and bake pizza place. And so I believe that one of the reasons why I have such good work ethic is I started working the day I turned 12 because I wanted to buy my own stuff. I wanted to earn my own money. So I worked there until I was 18. But, you know, learning how to lead a crew from my mom, what was most important to her was A, customers happy, bottom line. B, we're happy, bottom line. And so it was all about, you know, dealing with the rush and the customers and everything and having a fun time doing it, enjoying each other's company and challenging each other to do better and more and faster. And, just making it a really fun time as well as a really hard, as well as hard work, you know? Yeah. And so really that approach, I've always taken that approach in that these are my people and I want them to succeed and be happy and do well. And what I ask in return is do a good job for me,
Mhm.
but they're going to see me doing the same job right next to them,
Mm.
And so like starting at the county, I'll be honest, I was kind of walking into a swamp. I was about to go into some quicksand, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But I start at the county. I get hired on as a supervisor of the service desk, and I've got like 5 guys under me. And on my first week, we are moving our sheriff's office, patrol division, and investigations division from one building across town to another building. So I show up, of course, I'm in a tie. I've got my suit, I'm fully decked out. I show up on my first day and we're just physically moving computers and stuff.
Yeah,
So I just,
crawling around in a
yeah.
machine closet. Yeah.
So I just say, screw it. And I take off the tie and the jacket and I get in there next to my guys and start doing everything. And then obviously the next day I know we're doing stuff. So I show up in like, jeans and a polo shirt and then start running cable with these guys, And one of the guys afterwards says, yeah, I didn't know about you on that first day when you showed up in your fancy duds. He said, but then when you showed up the next day and ran cables with us in your regular clothes, we knew you were okay.
Yeah, yeah. I will say, but just not to date myself a little bit, but like
Yeah.
it used to be back in the day when a CCIE was like the best certification you were going to get kind of thing. The Cisco books always had
Yes.
pictures of people and they had like a white shirt on with a tie and they were like, and you're like, no one racks equipment in a tie and a white shirt. That's just the way to ruin a tie and a white shirt.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that totally makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, in a roundabout way, kind of back to the original question of, what do I do, to help teach these people this kind of thing? I make sure they feel they're a part of something. We're all in this together. That's one of the most critical things. Um, and, you know, then just be very, very clear about what our goals are.
Mm.
What are our expectations? Where do we need to be? What do we need to do? And, honestly, people are smart and they'll figure out how to get there.
Mm. So there's an interesting through line through good leaders that I've met in my career, good leaders I've worked for. In fact, I was just talking about this earlier today, and the through line is this notion of it's an amalgam of integrity and like sort of like a disciplined focus, right?
Yeah.
And this servant leadership of like knowing that the people around you are on a mission with you, but like they are also on their own missions, and you have to be a servant to both, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's I find that like. What's really interesting to me is when you meet leaders who are like that, who manage to like take that and build that team ethos. It's an incredibly powerful thing. It's an incredibly powerful thing. I will also go on just as a side note because we're here. Like I ended up listening. There's a kind of an interesting YouTube video that's making its way around the internet, and it's of a guy from the Marine Corps, and he actually asked the question like, why are the Marine Corps medals centered at 1/8 of an inch up? And so he asked the audience, and like I'm totally expecting some sort of like shores of Tripoli. That's why we have the sword kind of historical story. And he's like, the reason is because we made it up. But he's like, but that's because a relentless adherence to a rigid standard is part of what makes the Marine Corps the Marine Corps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we made this up and we make sure absolutely everybody follows it. And it is part of what builds this organization. And the thing about that like kind of resonates with me is like, when you build a high performance organization, there are certain aspects of it that are sort of, these are the invariants that you can push off against. These are the things that are sort of the scaffolding for this team. And some of that comes from the leader, right? Like if you have a leader who's like, the customer comes first, to your point about your mom. Like if you have a leader who's like, and then we're going to come second, right? Everybody here, we care about each other, that kind of thing. Those invariants build an environment that people can be very successful in if they know, and they can also self-select out if that's not for them, right? And
Absolutely.
I think it's an interesting dynamic. It's very, I think it's tough sometimes when you like this. I remember my first leadership role when I realized just how much of it was just about people, right?
Yeah.
And how little of it, like there's a lot of spreadsheets and there's a lot of like the bottom line and the KTLO and all this sort of stuff, but like a lot of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and it's funny because I mean, like I was saying, I as I mentioned, I was actually kind of heading right for a bunch of quicksand.
Mm.
When I started doing this, I was going to make some big mistakes.
Mm.
And this is the thing that was incredibly fortunate to me. My boss at the time basically stepped up and became my mentor in leadership and saved my bacon.
Nice. So that's that. I will say, like, if you could have a good mentor, a good person to sit off the side, be like, allow me to ask you a few questions, just to understand what the hell you're about to do, kind of a thing, right? So yeah.
Exactly.
All right. I want to say first off, thank you so much for visiting with us, right? I do want to ask a question I always ask everybody, which is like, if there was a resource that you were going to recommend to people to either get smart or be smart, stay smart on IT or industry or something like that, what would it be? What do you go to? What's your go-to?
Really I look at the news from Krebs. Krebs on security. That's pretty much my news. I keep an eye on that. Otherwise, honestly, I've been using ChatGPT a lot. And it's really been helping me in a lot of development type roles that I've been working on.
Okay.
And so honestly, I've been very skeptical of the output, obviously. And I have noted a number of, sort of anomalies and, just kind of helped reveal kind of where the boundaries are and kind of what you can get out of it and what you can't. So,
So we were just doing a webinar. My CTO and I were doing a webinar yesterday, I want to say, on knowledge management. And one of the things that we were pointing out was like provenance of information is actually a critical thing. And when you did research using books, provenance, you had a bibliography and you had references and this sort of stuff. So you were able to okay, this person isn't just making stuff up. And large language models don't have that. You take all of the world's information, put it in a blender, and then hope for the best. And one of the things that's so interesting is now that OpenAI came back with sort of this deep research mode where it will actually give you the references, right? I find that amazingly helpful. I find okay, do this research for me, come on back, give me the bullet points, give me the links and citations. And then I can go check those because you're absolutely right. Sometimes it just goes pretty far afield.
Yep.
All right, well, I want to say thank you so much for visiting with us. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.